Good evening, and thank you for joining our Teaching for 21st Century webinar brought to you by the David Horowitz Freedom Center and the Glazov Gang. I'm your host, Annie Cyrus. Please use the Q&A box on your screen if you have any questions joining us on Zoom. If you're joining us on Facebook, feel free to use the comment section with your questions, and I promise we will get to answer all of them as soon as our very special guest presentation is over, which I actually told him earlier today. I've been counting moments for this moment. With us this evening is Robert Spencer. He does not need any introduction, but here goes what I like to do, introducing Robert Spencer, Shaman Fellow at the David Horowitz Freedom Center. He's also the director of jihadwatch.org and author of many books. His latest, Did Muhammad Exist? And I'm pretty sure, stay tuned because a new one is coming out soon. Hello, Robert.
Hello, Annie. Yes, you're right. The Critical Quran will be out November 16th. And so it's available for pre-order now at Amazon. It is the first honest translation of the Quran that gives commentary to show the context. Because, you know, as you probably have heard, when you quote the Quran in a negative way in America today, then leftists and Islamic apologists always say, well, you're taking it out of context, you see. So this one has all the context, all the explanations from mainstream Islamic commentaries as to how mainstream Muslims understand the various passages. So that's the Critical Quran, coming in just a few weeks and available for pre-order now.
Fantastic. I'll make sure to get in touch because, as you know, I like to have your books signed by you. So I would like to have a copy signed, but that's for a discussion out off air. I know you're going to talk about my favorite topic, which is a sad topic and a tragic topic. Sorry, I shouldn't be so excited. But floor is yours. Let's talk about the crisis with Afghan refugees.
Yes, the Biden administration has announced that it's going to bring over 95,000 Afghan refugees into the United States. Many of them are already here, and it is likely that that number is even higher than 95,000 because the Biden administration has not exactly been honest with us. And if they're willing to admit to 95,000, it's likely that the number is significantly higher. As a matter of fact, I heard just this morning that some people are saying they're bringing over people still, Afghans that is, not Americans who are in Afghanistan, as many as 1,000 a day. So the numbers could be very large of Afghan refugees coming into the United States. We have no idea who these people are. Most people probably assume that the Biden administration is bringing over, or at least intends to bring over, the interpreters, the people who worked for the US military in the 20 years of our misadventure in Afghanistan, or the families of the interpreters, or people who applied for the special immigrant visas that have been made available to Afghans. None of this is true. And even the Biden administration, with its record of dishonesty, has admitted that most of those 95,000 people that they are bringing or have already brought to the United States are not the recipients of these visas and are not the interpreters. The interpreters were, for the most part, left behind to be tortured and killed by the Taliban. The special immigrant visas, we have no idea. Probably most of them were left behind as well. So who are the people that we've got? Nobody knows. Not Joe Biden, although Joe doesn't really know much of anything. Not Jen Psaki, not anybody in the administration knows who these people are. And the fact that they knew they were bringing these people over without knowing who they are, well, think about that for a minute. Are they stupid or are they evil? Or are they both? But what possible good could come from bringing over 95,000 people at least from Afghanistan, one of the foremost jihadi hotspots in the world? You think about it. Most people in Afghanistan support the Taliban. If they didn't support the Taliban, then they wouldn't be in power. And then you will say, well, yes, of course, but those who don't like the Taliban are the ones we got, because if they liked them, then they wouldn't have come here. Okay, great. Who else is in Afghanistan. We know that ISIS, the Khorasan group of ISIS, is there. They don't like the Taliban because the Taliban is fighting a localized jihad in Afghanistan, whereas ISIS believes that they ought to broaden and fight a jihad in the whole world. Now, actually, the Taliban is perfectly willing to do that. And several Taliban spokesmen have already said that they're going to export their jihad, that they want to see Islamic law over the whole world. And Afghanistan is just the beginning. So the dispute with ISIS is not really all that deep and probably not likely to be long lasting. However, it is entirely within the realm of possibility that some supporters of ISIS, or even some members of ISIS, got on those planes. It is also within the realm of possibility, even though the Taliban is in power in Afghanistan, that some supporters of the Taliban got on those planes. Why? Because if you were a supporter of the Taliban, you were likely to be a believer in Islamic law. If you were a believer in Islamic law, then you were a believer in the Quran. If you were a believer in the Quran, then you believe in chapter 4, verse 100 of the Quran, which promises great rewards from Allah to those who emigrate in the cause of Allah, those who leave one land and go to another in the cause of Allah. And so you might think that even though you're very happy that the Taliban is now in power in Afghanistan, that this is a golden opportunity with these airplanes right there in Kabul, that you can get a ride to the United States and bring the word of Allah there, not by preaching, but by jihad. There's also, of course, Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda also believes in the same book, and that it's a great blessing, great blessings from Allah will come to you if you emigrate in his cause. There's more. Wait, there's more. Not long after the United States, do you know about Bagram Air Base? The United States abandoned Bagram Air Base in the most shameful manner, in the dark of night, not telling the Afghan National Army that we were leaving, and just getting up and quietly going away. This was the Biden administration. Nobody had ever had a plan to do this before that. Bagram Air Base was the home of a prison where there were literally thousands of Al-Qaeda and ISIS prisoners. Do you think it's possible that any of those Al-Qaeda or ISIS prisoners might have gotten on the planes? And you'll say, well, no, of course they're in prison. No, because as soon as we left Bagram Air Base in the dark of night, the Taliban came into it and they opened the gates of that prison and they let them all out. Now, remember the scenes at Kabul airport? Do you remember how it was absolutely chaotic and there were long lines of people trying to get on the planes? And when the planes took off, there were actually people, tragic scenes of people holding on to the planes and then dropping off to their deaths? No. In a situation like that, who do you think is most likely to be the ones who actually got on the planes? But the strongest, the most ruthless, and the best armed, because they would be able to fight their way to the front of the line, and they would be able to make sure that they fought off everybody else and got onto the planes. And who are those people likely to be but the ISIS and Al-Qaeda prisoners or other jihadis like them? The British have already caught one. And probably if they tell you that they've caught one, because our governments all over the West are so dishonest now, they've probably caught more than one. But the British have already announced they made a raid actually to a luxury hotel where they're putting up the Afghan refugees. Must be nice. I should pose as an Afghan refugee and go stay in a luxury hotel in Britain. But in any case, they made a raid on this hotel and carried the guy away after they flew him from Kabul to London. He was on the watch list, but they weren't paying any attention to who they were getting. And they brought him over. There have been other reports of Afghans on terror watch lists who have been caught. And there's another aspect to this as well. Fort McCoy in Wisconsin. Afghan refugees staying there. 2 of them have already been arrested. Very soon, actually, after they arrived in the United States, they got arrested for, one of them for sexual abuse of a minor and the other for spousal abuse. One thing that was not, of course, in any of the mainstream media reports about these arrests was the fact that these guys were just acting the way they probably acted in Afghanistan. That in Afghanistan, there is no religious or cultural or societal prohibition on either sexual abuse of a minor or spousal abuse. And now you will say, oh no, Spencer, you terrible racist Islamophobe. How could you say such a thing? Are you telling me that they stand by and let children be abused and don't do a thing about it? Yeah, that's what I'm telling you. Why is that? Because of Muhammad's example. Everything flows from Islam. In Islamic cultures, don't kid yourself, we're always told that there are various practices. Whenever anybody mentions an uncomfortable practice in an Islamic country, then the apologists will say, oh, well, see, that's cultural. That has nothing to do with Islam. In Islamic countries, what is cultural comes from Islam. Islam has been around for 1400 years, and it is a very potent cultural influence. The idea that there are non-Islamic cultural practices that persist in places like Iran or Saudi Arabia or Afghanistan is naive. Iran maybe, actually, because it was westernized up until the 1970s, but that's another story for another day. In Afghanistan, the average Muslim knows that Muhammad, according to Islamic tradition, married Aisha when she was 6 and consummated the marriage or raped her when she was 9 and he was 54. How do I know that the average Muslim knows this? Well, in the first place, because any school will teach you about Muhammad. In Afghanistan, that's of cardinal importance. And this is a mainstream feature of Muhammad's life. It's not something that Western Islamophobes have dug up and are trying to charge Muhammad with doing, and no Muslim really thinks that. As a matter of fact, the first time that the Americans, actually the only time, that the Americans toppled the Taliban in 2003, excuse me, then aid workers went into Afghanistan and they went into refugee camps of the people who had been dislocated during the conflict. And they found that half of the girls of 2nd grade age were already married, and all of the girls above that were already married. 3rd grade and above, all married. You want to ask why that is? It's because of Muhammad. It's because of Islam. And so this fellow at Fort McCoy, he gets there and there's a minor and he molests the minor. I doubt that it was his first offense of that kind. But the others were in Afghanistan and nobody paid any attention. Now in the United States, he ran up against a system of law quite different from the one to which he was accustomed. It's the same thing with the spousal abuse. The Quran says good women are obedient. As for those from whom you fear disobedience, it's noteworthy that the Quran does not say those who are disobedient. It says those from whom you fear disobedience. So you see, if you are the husband, or the Muslim husband of a few wives, and one of them, maybe she's given you the side eye or something, but there's something about her that makes you think that she might be disobedient in the future, then the Quran says, admonish her. That's step 1. Send her to separate beds, which is probably more of a punishment for the husband than the wife in this case, but okay. And 3, beat her. This is what the Quran says. Here again, Islamic apologists, they will tell you, see, it doesn't really mean that. It doesn't mean what it says. It means that you should take a toothbrush, because Muhammad, see, one time he was brushing his teeth and the Muslims came to him and said, what should we beat our wives with? And Muhammad said this, takes his toothbrush. So yeah, this is silly. You know, this is not really how these things work in Islamic cultures. And there are numerous videos. Actually, if you go to the Middle East Media Research Institute, MEMRI, Memory Online, and memory.org, you will find just the other day they posted a video of another Muslim preacher, a Muslim cleric, saying, yeah, beat your wife if you fear disobedience. Just make sure that you don't leave any marks and don't do it in public. But the toothbrush business, he doesn't say anything about that. The idea that wife beating is somehow wrong. This is something actually that Muslims have found kind of silly and contemptible on the part of Westerners, all the way back to the Crusades, 1,000 years ago. When I wrote The Politically Incorrect Guide to Islam and the Crusades, and later The History of Jihad, I read a lot of Crusader literature on both sides. And a lot of the Muslims who wrote at the time the Crusades were happening about the Crusades, they would make fun of the Franks, as they called them, the Western Europeans, really, many of whom were Franks, of course, but they would say, they're so weak, they let their women rule them. And they don't even beat them if they disobey. No. This is something that, as far as the pious Muslim is concerned, is something that Allah has said is justified, and so therefore there's not really any discussion about it. It is what it is. And so this guy, he beats his wife at Fort McCoy. I'm sure both of these men were completely surprised when they got arrested, because they probably were not fully versed on American culture and didn't realize that they had crossed any lines. And I would expect that the lawyers who represent them are likely to make that kind of argument. After all, in the case in Michigan of Dr. Jumana Nagarwala, an Indian Muslim doctor who was charged with performing female genital mutilation on various girls, children under 10, her lawyer argued that it was a matter of religious freedom, that this was part of her religion, which was bitterly ironic, since the establishment media in every FGM story that had ever come down the pike for decades would always make sure to say this has nothing to do with Islam, it's just cultural. And now suddenly, oh yeah, it has everything to do with Islam, and that's why we should let it go, religious freedom. So that's likely to be how these men are going to defend themselves. But the larger issue is that probably other men are going to act the same way, others of these refugees, because this is the culture in which they grew up. This is the atmosphere that they lived in. This is the way they were taught to behave. And they're not going to just suddenly become Ozzie Nelson when they come over here. It's probably some reference way too old for you. I don't know who to say. Some Bill Cosby's no good. I don't know. Whatever paradigmatic, gentle, kind father there is, but I'm not sure there is anything like that anymore in American culture. Anyway, there's more. 700, at least 700, that's what's been reported. At least 700 Afghan refugees have walked away from these military bases where they're being held. They're supposed to be at the military bases being acclimated to the United States. Presumably, somebody's going to tell them, don't marry 9-year-olds and don't beat your wife. Presumably, but not certainly, because you never know these days. But in any case, a lot of them are going to miss the instruction because they've already gone. 700 of them, we have no idea where they are. They walked off from Fort McCoy, Fort Bliss, the other places where they're being held. They're somewhere in the United States. They could be doing anything. The stories that were published about this in the establishment media, they waved it away. They said, well, it's no big deal. Probably, for the most part, these people, they had friends and relatives already in the country, and they're just going to meet up with them. It's not illegal because they're not prisoners, so they can go wherever they want. Okay, that's great. But coming back to the first point about the possibility that they may be jihadis, it's deeply disturbing. And it shows up just how wrong-headed this whole idea has been to bring them over in the first place. Now, many people will say, we had a responsibility to bring them. We had to bring them because they helped us out over there. Except remember, these are not the people who helped us out. So why did we bring these people over here? There's only one possible answer. Maybe you have another. You can let me know in a minute. But the only way I can figure this is that the Biden administration wants refugees who are dependent upon the welfare system and the good graces of the American government. And so they will vote to keep all that going, and that means they will reliably vote Democratic. Also, the Biden administration is full of socialist internationalists. They don't like borders. We can see that at the southern border right now. If they liked the idea of a nation state, that would not be happening. If they liked the idea of protecting the American people, that would not be happening. But the fact that the southern border is essentially open and anybody can walk in from anywhere in the world is an indication that the Biden administration has a very different agenda. They don't care about Americans, and they want to bring in large numbers of non-Americans into the United States. Now, some people who come into the United States from elsewhere are very happy to become Americans and to accept the parameters of American society, but others are not. And the more that there are here, the fewer become the number of those who do hold to the values and principles that made America great. If you're a socialist internationalist, that's just the kind of outcome you want. You want to destroy the nation state, and the United States is the foremost nation state. You bring in people from all over the world and sow chaos. It's just what you want. And so here we are. This is what we got. And what can we do about it? You're probably going to ask, and I wish I had an answer. Obviously, what we need to do is throw these bums out and elect people who are actually Americans who hold to American values and have the best interests of the American people at heart. Even immigrants who have the best interests of the American people at heart, but not these socialist internationalists who are in power now. And in order to vote them out, of course, we have to be able to make sure that we're having free elections at all, which is the first battle that has to be fought right now. And it's by no means clear if we're going to even have an election in 22 and 24 that is not overwhelmed like 20 was and rendered null and void. So if you are of an activist bent, I would urge you to work for election integrity and to work for some sanity in our immigration policies with the remaining representatives in Washington who still do have America's best interests at heart. And all we can do is brace ourselves and hope that we can turn this around when we get the chance. And thank you very much. And on that happy note, if you have any questions, let's go.
Well, I have about 100,000, but I will try to be fair and read our audience's questions too. But I just have the first question I have. You said we could hope that somebody's going to give them a memo to not marry a 9-year-old girl and don't beat their wives, right? Do you think on that note, are they also going to tell them not to kill Christians and Jews and not to behead us, or they might have skipped that part?
You know, the fact is, I'm not sure they're going to tell them any of this because it would be Islamophobic to tell them.
Yeah, I figured we don't want to hurt their feelings and provoke them. Then they come kill us because we provoke them, right?
Yeah, sure. And also, we don't want to be ethnocentric. especially now when all the people who are probably running these programs have already been taught to hate their own culture and heritage, and to think George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and the rest, they were just slave owners and racists, and that's all, and they have nothing to tell us. And so they don't value what we have here. They don't understand the importance of a free society or the way that a free society works. So will they tell the Afghans about it? I don't know. Will they tell them not to do these things that are Islamic, that are at variance with American values, when they've been told probably all their lives that any kind of questioning of Islam or critical word about Islam, it's all Islamophobia, racism, bigotry, and it must be avoided at all costs. And so I don't know that they're even going to be taught these things at all. However, it is possible that things like the child molestation and so on are so glaring and so obviously at variance with American law and culture and custom that maybe they'll put in a word about that. But as far as violence against unbelievers goes, I doubt that will be mentioned at all, because it will be assumed that these people are adherents of the religion of peace and none of them harbor any desire to do violence to unbelievers. And so it would be just insulting even to bring that up.
I have a solution to that problem. Why don't we just hand every single one of them a copy of your upcoming Quran book?
They don't read English.
Okay, now I have. Would you like me to translate that book to Dari so they can read it?
Yes, I would.
I'll be more than happy to translate it to Dari, and then we can pass. I know I'm not making light of the issue, but seriously, it sometimes feels so hopeless that I feel like I just have to be sarcastic or my head might blow up. You know.
Oh, I'm totally with you on that.
Okay, let's just start with the first question from Caitlin. I think that's how I should say her name. If I said it wrong, sorry. Do you know the status of the plane with Americans and Afghans with green card that was sitting in Dubai?
No, I don't. This has all been dropped now from the headlines.
I actually do. Afghanistan International announced that on Friday morning, Afghanistan time, they announced that the flights are starting to take off.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll see. Okay, great.
But again, I just read the Afghan International news or listen to their TV channel because they are, they're telling the truth, unlike our media.
Yeah, I would want to know if the planes that are taking off are the ones that have Americans and Afghans with green card. That I don't think we can take for granted. There could be anybody on those planes.
I was just about to say the first report that came out on Afghanistan International said 3 planes are getting ready to take off. However, there is no confirmation who's in it.
Yes.
So they could be anybody. Okay. Robert is asking, Robert, do you think the Taliban was responsible for that terrorist attack at Kabul airport, that they allowed ISIS-K to enter the airport and commit the terror attack?
Yeah, I do think that they were likely working together in that, certainly. There's no proof of that because they're not going to tell us about their dealings, but the Taliban has never made any secret that it regards Americans as the enemy. And the idea that ISIS would have done this against the wishes of the Taliban is just naive.
Very true. Okay, this one is from Facebook viewer of ours. Carol is asking, does the Quran say Jesus died?
The Quran actually is ambiguous on that point. The Quran says that they did not kill or crucify him, but it appeared so to them, which appears to be a borrowing from a Gnostic gospel, that the Gnostics believed that physical matter was evil, and so the Savior had to have no physical being, was just a spirit, a phantasm. And so he's not crucified. He only looks as if he's being crucified. And the Quran took this over. Apparently, there were Gnostics in the areas where the Quran was composed, and they took this story And chapter 4, verse 157 says that that Jesus was not crucified. And then later it says that he was taken up into paradise with Allah. And so apparently there's the ascension that Christians observe, but no resurrection, no crucifixion, no resurrection, just the ascension of a living Jesus. That appears to be the Quranic idea on that.
Okay, I'm going to put these two questions into one from Michael. He said, so essentially we gave people that want to destroy us and spread their cult's ideology and express lane to get here. So how long until Americans begin paying the price for this in a major ways? And secondly, do you think our legal system will enforce our laws and punish this evil and abuse, or will they fold and excuse it?
Both. This is how it'll happen. Something will happen. Could happen tomorrow, could be next year, but something will happen involving jihad terror committed by an Afghan refugee. And then we will hear how he was mentally ill, and we will hear how he wasn't really a Muslim. He didn't ever go to mosque. He argued with the mosque leaders in Afghanistan or here. He was troubled. He was a loner. All these things. So in other words, he will be punished if he wasn't killed in the attack. He'll go to prison or whatever. But then it will all be excused so that nobody gets the idea that there's any Islamic jihad going on here. That's the way it always works. And then we'll hear about how the local mosque is bracing itself for the anti-Muslim backlash.
Do you think it would be a good idea if we all got in our cars, drove to the bases and just gave them hugs? Is that going to fix the problem?
Yes, they just need a little love, that's all.
A little love. To be honest, as an ex-Muslim, I can testify that, yes, if growing up as a Muslim, if you would be taught a little bit more love, well, just a little bit love, not a little bit more, and a little less hate, a lot of these jihadis wouldn't end up being jihadis. But sadly, you're taught hate way more than anything. 51% of the Quran teaches hate. Okay, Diane is asking, have jihadi Muslims invaded our government to work for us?
Well, if they are, they're stealthy. Obviously, there are many Muslims in the government, and old Joe promised to appoint Muslims at every level of his administration. He said that to a Muslim Brotherhood linked organization last summer. The Muslim Brotherhood is dedicated, in its own words, to eliminating and destroying Western civilization from within and sabotaging its miserable house. Now, the goal of jihad is to destroy non-Muslim states and to establish Islamic law wherever possible. So the goal of that sabotage is also to destroy the American government so that ultimately it can be replaced by Sharia. Are there Muslim Brotherhood operatives in the United States government now? Almost certainly. There certainly were during the Obama administration, but they've gotten considerably less publicity over the last few months. Nonetheless, it is very reasonable to assume that they're there. And they have the same goal as the jihadis, even if they're not violent.
How long do you think until the actual jihadis are going to come out and introduce themselves while in our government?
Oh, that's going to be a long time, because why would they do that? You have somebody in government who's linked to the Muslim Brotherhood, and he's dedicated to sabotaging the American government. If he comes out and says, I'm in favor of jihad, I'm not really a moderate, I believe in all those things that the Taliban believe in, and so on, then he gets fired, he gets investigated, he goes to prison. Meanwhile, if he stays there and says that he rejects all that, and he's a moderate, and he meanwhile opposes counter-terror measures and opposes any realistic approach to dealing with the jihad threat, and opposes anything effective to meet to stop the jihadis, then all his co-workers think, isn't it wonderful that we have a Muslim working here? It shows our commitment to diversity and multiculturalism. And aren't we great? And look at those terrible Trump MAGA hat wearing racist redneck yahoos who would object to our friend Ahmed being here. And they don't have a clue how they're being played.
Yeah, and then if you don't mind me adding, our audience are well educated on the topic, but remember, there's not just one type of jihad. So a lot of them
Yeah.
are already committing jihad, but they're committing the different types of jihad instead of killing all non-Muslims jihad. Like recently, how they tried to, defund the defense system of Israel. That if that went through and if they were successful, am I right to think they absolutely won that jihad? Robert?
Oh yeah. There's jihad of the pen, jihad of the tongue, and so on, various kinds of jihad that are delineated in Islamic law. And so, yes, when you asked me, are there jihadis? Yeah, there are certainly jihadis in the US government. But are there violent jihadis? No. But they're going about pursuing the same goal by nonviolent means.
Agreed. Okay, this is a good question from Ben. If, hypothetically, we were getting most of the translators and guides who helped us out of Kabul, why should we trust that they aren't just as much of a problem? In 2015, even the New York Times had to admit that American soldiers were being ordered to ignore incidents of Afghan translators raping children.
Yeah, absolutely. The cultural problems that I've been discussing here today, and there are many more, they would be the same. The idea that we can just assimilate 100,000 refugees from Afghanistan without taking into account anything about the vast difference between Afghan culture and American culture, it's extraordinarily wrongheaded, and it's going to cause trouble. And even if these people were completely loyal to the United States, they still were brought up in a culture that despises women, that despises Jews, that despises non-Muslims, that believes that violence is indeed a solution to all kinds of problems that we would not have recourse to violence to try to solve. All manner of things. It's even the toilet. There's stories out of the Grand Hotel Scarborough on the Yorkshire coast in England, where Afghan refugees are being held, that they go into the bathrooms, and it's a terrible situation because the Afghan refugees don't know how to use a Western toilet, and they don't want to use it because they believe it's un-Islamic. And so even just small things, there's going to be massive disruption culturally all over America as a result of these people coming in. Some of them they'll learn, like the toilet, and deal with it, but some of them they will not, and there will be conflict.
Very true. Okay, here's a question from Stephen Mix. I see the problem as a numbers game. Even if we import just 1% of the world's Muslims, America will become fully Islamic. That is 15 million Muslims, about 5% of the American population. Do you have a more clear idea about what the tipping point is in the Islamic population?
Well, what I don't have a clear idea about is what exactly you mean by a tipping point. Certainly, there doesn't have to be a majority of Muslims for them to be calling for Sharia in a particular land, a particular area. There are many examples of this. Nigeria is one notorious one right now, where there's massive persecution of the Christians and concerted efforts to impose Sharia. Some Nigerian states have already imposed Sharia, but they don't have even 50% of the population there, maybe close to it. But that has not been an impediment. They believe that they have an imperative to impose Sharia over the whole world. That's not based on numbers. And so whenever it becomes possible to further that objective, even in the absence of a majority of Muslims in a country, then there will be some Muslims who will pursue that. And well, that's why we have some jihadis in the American government. That is, some who are inclined to work toward the imposition of Sharia here, because they believe that it's a historic responsibility that they have before Allah to work toward that. And if they get the opportunity somehow to bring Sharia here, even before there's a majority of Muslims here, there's no reason not to do that at all.
I agreed. Many of the Islamic countries today, including my own motherland, Sharia was applied to the constitution before the people of the country actually submitted to becoming Muslims. They just had no choice at that point. Okay, here's a question from our audience on Facebook. Is there a relationship between the failure of faith in the Western world and the surge of Islamism?
Oh, very much so, yeah. Nature abhors a vacuum. And, you know, every time I think about this, every time I see like those ginger converts in Britain, these red-haired boys, and they've grown the big beard and shaved the mustache, and they're wearing the kufi and wearing a kaftan. And I think if Britain had any cultural self-confidence, then maybe they would be, I don't know, Anglican monks or something at this point, or something of that nature. But the churches are not giving young people in Britain or Western Europe or the United States any sense of purpose or meaning to their lives. And they are just, the whole secular world, the secular materialism, it's not been found to be satisfactory to satisfy the longings of the human heart and soul. And Islam purports to answer that. It does give people a grounding and a purpose. And I think that the mainline churches are making a big mistake by just echoing the secular culture and accepting everything the secular culture accepts. Because then people who turn away in disgust, and there's plenty to turn away in disgust from in the secular culture, they don't have anywhere to go. And then Islam comes along and says, well, actually, you do have a place to go. Come with us.
That's almost disturbing, knowing what they would pick to go to. But okay, here's a question from Michael. Any idea how many of these Muslim Afghan refugees were raped as kids, children, bachabazi, and does that have anything to do with the contribute of their violent acts?
Well, I don't know. I don't have any idea, actually, and there's no way to tell because no statistics of that kind are kept. It's something that's accepted and taken for granted. You know, it's, I don't know, like I don't know how many times I have walked into this office. It's not illegal yet, and it's just an ordinary thing, so I don't keep track. And it's the same way with something like that. But I would venture to say that it's likely that the vast majority of them have been because of the fact that this is accepted, and it's been accepted for a considerable period of time. It's not like it's something new. And so the men who are abused as children in this way, they grow up and they do it themselves. And they think of it as just, it's a natural part of growing up.
And it's interesting, about a week ago, and I don't know where, but I was on air and I said, please watch your children, boys or girls, doesn't matter. And a lot of people were very confused as to why am I worried about the boys? I should just worry about the girls. I'm like, this one culture, this one specific country, you need to watch both girls and boys if
No
they're
doubt about it.
kids.
You know, I didn't say it because it didn't seem pertinent, but maybe it was. And that is that the minor who was molested at Fort McCoy, I believe, was a boy. And of course, in the Quran, you have not only the virgins of paradise, but boys like pearls attending the blessed who have attained paradise. And this has been the basis for a wide acceptance of this kind of behavior, particularly in Afghanistan and also elsewhere in the Islamic world.
Yeah, but you know how it is. We misunderstood that verse, Robert.
Yeah,
It's
we
not
always-
saying
we
boys are
always do.
past. We always do. Okay, would another reason for bringing in all these Afghans and potential criminals through the southern border to be the initiate martial laws, providing the federal government control over citizens?
Yeah, I guess that could be down the road, that the more they do to harass, to demonize, to annoy, to bother, to disrupt, to cause trouble for ordinary Americans, the more likely it is that some people will start to protest. We've already seen this with the school boards and ordinary Americans protesting against these terrible things being taught in the schools. And what did the Biden FBI do? Said they were domestic terrorists. If you read the reports that the FBI was talking about and working from, there's no terrorism. There are no threats. They're just angry people. And the fact that they were labeled domestic terrorists, it's extremely ominous and revelatory of the Biden administration's overall plan. And I think that they want to create more of these things that annoy Americans so that more Americans will decide that they need to fight back, and then they can clamp down. So that even the protests now, they're trying to make it so that they're playing into their hands.
It's a pretty dangerous game they have started for both sides. It is sad when I have to say both sides in United States of America, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a thing of the past, I'm afraid. Maybe it never was. On the other hand, I know that, no, I can't, I retract that, excuse me. I can't say it never was, because I know that when I was a young man, it was taken for granted that you treated your opponents with respect. You understood that, well, I can tell you, you know, when I was a very small child, about 5, 6, I asked my father who was the good guy in the 1968 presidential election, Richard Nixon or Hubert Humphrey, and he said, they're both good men, son, because they both have America's best interests at heart. They just have different ideas of how that should be attained. And you can't say that anymore. But it's certainly at that, I think at that time, it really was true, perhaps with some reservations.
When did it start to go wrong, Robert?
Well, I think probably right around that time, actually, with the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War was the first large-scale, real hatred of the United States that spread among Americans. I mean, of course, in the Antifa riots last year, you saw people in Kenosha, Wisconsin and Oakland, California, actually screaming death to America. I don't think they did that during the Vietnam War riots, but there was a tremendous amount of anti-Americanism to them, and the idea that America was not what it claimed to be in being the land of the free and the home of the brave and the freest society on earth and so on, and that it only grew since then. But there are a variety of factors that went into that, and there seemed to have, of course, there were seeds to that led up to the Vietnam War protests. So probably you can go back farther to the activity of communists in the United States starting in the 1920s and 30s, and maybe before that, I don't know.
Wow. Okay, here's the last question that I have from Diane asking, would you please explain Hijra?
Yeah, the idea of Hijra is that you emigrate from one land to another, and you bring Islam to the new land. And then, as I explained before, actually, then you will get rewards from Allah. Now, this is very important because the Quran does not often promise rewards from Allah. This is one of the foremost places where it does, chapter 4, verse 100. Another one is chapter 9, verse 111, which guarantees paradise to those who kill and are killed for Allah. And that's the basis for suicide bombing. Lesser blessed, but still blessed, is the Hijra, emigration. When Muhammad emigrated from Mecca to Medina, that's considered to be the beginning of Islam. That's how important emigration is. It's not just some side issue. If you go to an Islamic bookstore and buy yourself an Islamic calendar, it'll tell you this year is 14, I always forget what year it is. Is it 1432, 1430? I forget. Anyway, so 1430 somewhere. Annie doesn't know because the Iranians have yet another calendar.
Oh, we're on 1400 on Iranian calendar.
Yeah, but that's a different one from the Islamic calendar.
Yes.
Anyway, the calendar does not begin with Muhammad's life, Muhammad's death, Muhammad's becoming a prophet. It begins when Muhammad emigrated, the Hijra. Hijra is flight, when he left Mecca and fled to Medina and became for the first time a political and military leader, as well as a spiritual leader. So the implication of having the year one of Islam being the year one of the Hijra, AH after the Hijra, Anno Hijire, the year of the Hijra, the implication is that Islam is not fully Islam until it's political and military as well as religious. So the Hijra is very important in that way, but also it is a foremost work that Muslims can do. And that's very important as well, that when chapter 4, verse 100 promises great rewards to those who emigrate, you have to understand that in light of chapter 21, verse 47 of the Quran, which says that in paradise, or actually at the judgment, there are these great scales that are set up, and your good deeds are put in one scale and your bad deeds are put in another. And if your bad deeds outweigh your good deeds, you go to hell. If your good deeds outweigh your bad deeds, you go to paradise. Now that's enough to drive anybody crazy, because if you think about it, how much do your deeds weigh? How many good deeds have you committed? How many bad deeds? Nobody knows the answers to those things. And so you can drive yourself mad with anxiety, wondering if you have enough good deeds to go to paradise, or if you're going to end up in hell. And so you might want to tip the scales a little bit. How do you tip the scales? Well, the best way is the best thing you can do. Muhammad was asked, what is the best deed, or a deed greater than jihad? And he said, I can't think of one. In other words, there's nothing better than jihad. And jihad guarantees paradise to those who kill and are killed. So the first thing you can do is blow yourself up, or go shoot a place up and get yourself shot. And then you're golden. You're going to paradise. Do not pass go, do not collect $200. However, if you don't have the nerve to do that, and a lot of people don't, there was a very powerful video a few years back. I believe it was Taliban, actually, if my memory serves me well, but it may not. I'm getting old. The fellow is in a car and he's got the suicide vest and he's going to go blow himself up. He's going to drive into some place where there are American troops, I believe it was. That's why I think it might have been Afghanistan. Anyway, he's crying because he doesn't want to die. People love life. They don't want to die. He knows all that bourgeois about paradise and virgins and everything, but he really doesn't want to do it. And they force him to go ahead. Anyway, if you don't have the nerve, you might have the nerve to get up out of your own country and move to America and work to bring Islam here. And then you're almost as golden as if you blew yourself up, because you're going to get the rewards of the Hijra, of the emigration. And that might just tip your scales to the good side. So it's a very powerful inducement and a very central aspect of Islam.
I'm sorry. I know most of the time our audience can't see me when you're talking, but I just love how you put these phrases together, Robert. It's like,
you're very kind.
Because you're very correct. It's again, where I grew up, there is not much promotion of jihad as of blowing yourself up, but rather financing the jihad, which is kind of almost as much rewarding as jihad if you finance a jihadi, you know. But even with that, they constantly repeat this thing that life isn't worth holding on to, you know, you should be ready to die for Allah and in name of Allah and all that. And as a child, you're constantly sitting there, you're like, okay, I was sitting there thinking, now how come you're still alive? My entire question, the religious class was, why is my teacher not blown up? And she's preparing me to give up my life and blow myself up.
Well, that's a very good question, because Muhammad himself said that if it were up to me, then I would go and get martyred. And then I would come ask Allah to send me back, and I'd go and get martyred again. And I'd ask Allah to send me back, and I'd go and get martyred again. And I thought, and I was reading this, the first time I came across it, and thought, well, then why didn't you go do it, buddy? You never did get martyred. You could have done it even once, and maybe Allah would have sent you back. I don't know, but not even once.
Nope.
But he sent a lot of other people to do it.
Yeah, it's the same thing with every single one of them. I mean, name a single terrorist group's leader who actually showed up to do the terror attack themselves. No, they go hide and send their minions to do it, or jihadis, or whatever we call them.
Indeed.
Okay, so before we go, please do tell our audience one more time the name of your upcoming book. I know the recent one that came out recently in August was Did Muhammad Exist? And then also where we can pre-order your new book.
Yeah, the new book is The Critical Quran, and it is an honest translation. There are not many honest translations of the Quran in English. For example, a lot of passages in the Quran, you'll read it says in English, strive hard in the way of Allah. And if you read that, you think, oh, it means pray more, be more religious. But strive hard is jihad. And that is understood in traditional Islamic theology primarily as warfare against unbelievers. So when you read strive hard in the way of Allah, it does not convey to you the real meaning, which is what it's saying is go and fight unbelievers, go and kill unbelievers. Anyway, this is an honest translation that makes all that clear. Plus commentary that shows you how these things are understood in mainstream Islam, and even variant readings, which many Islamic apologists deny even exist, but variant readings of various passages of the Quran from alternate manuscripts. All of this is in the Critical Quran, much more. It will be out very soon, just a few weeks now, and it's available for pre-order at Amazon, Barnes & Noble. Any self-respecting bookstore has it or will have it.
Fantastic. And to our audience, I'm sure you already know, but if you're not subscribed to jihadwatch.org, as soon as we wrap up here, go subscribe, because Robert Spencer and Jihad Watch are heavily shadow banned on social media. The only way to get the message is to directly subscribe to their website. Robert, as always, it is absolute privilege hearing your thoughts and your wisdom. Thank you for your time, and thank you for being here with us tonight.
Thank you, Annie. Always good to see you. Have a good evening.
Absolutely. And to our lovely audience who has stayed with us until now, we appreciate you very much. And remember, these webinars are brought to you by the David Horowitz Freedom Center and the Glazov Gang for free. So if you like to continue supporting us, consider going to frontpagemag.com and make 100% tax deductible donation. With that being said, please watch your back, stay safe, and goodbye.